Romney wins big in Illinois, the U of I will get a new president, and voters nominate an alleged bribe taker. That's next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. I'm Bernard Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We've just been through an election, so luckily I have a couple of political experts to talk about things with me. To my left, Drew Thomason is here. He's a reporter at the Statehouse for Illinois Statehouse News. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
And Charlie Wheeler, Director of Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield, longtime Chicago Sun-Times Statehouse reporter before that, so Charlie pretty much knows everything, so we're good. Welcome back, Charlie.
Glad to be here, Bernie.
Romney, okay, there may have been gaffes later in the week, but Romney came to Illinois, did more campaigning than we thought he was going to do, including a Monday morning stop in Springfield at a diner, and Charlie Parker's, and which is a nice small room which made for great TV, except for the people who had to stand outside, but you know, these are campaigns these days. He really didn't end up having the problem people might think he would have with Rick Santorum and conservative voters in Illinois. How good was this for Illinois to play a role, and do we, you know, what does it mean in the way things are rolling out in the campaign? Charlie?
Well, it occurs to me that Romney's win wasn't any big surprise. Illinois is basically a moderate state. Santorum has done well in states where the preponderance of Republican voters are people who identify themselves as being very concerned about, for lack of a better term, this social agenda. People who identify themselves as being evangelicals, born-again Christians, for whom family values, moral issues are more important than anything else. Illinois has some people who share those sentiments, but they're not in the majority of the Republican Party. And if you look at the districts in which Rick Santorum won the delegates, as opposed to the districts, the congressional districts in which the Romney slates were chosen, they tended to be the districts downstate, rural areas, western Illinois, and the population centers tended to go for Governor Romney.
But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, talking to voters kind of downstate in this area and you know, outside of the collar counties in Cook County, it seemed like that's where Santorum wanted to pick up a lot of votes, and it seemed like a lot of those voters were kind of dissatisfied with both and would either not pull a ticket and just, you know, we saw low voter turnout. So
yeah, it was under 20%. Wasn't
yeah,
it?
so you know, you're not going to have the Santorum support there, or they voted for, you know, Ron Paul or Newt Gingrich, kind of just a throwaway vote, and I'm not giving my vote to either one of those guys.
Interesting. You know, I think, and some of us who have been here watching this for a little while, Illinois Republicans, while Illinois is a moderate state, in some Republican primaries we have gone more conservative. Like Al Selvey, who was a friend of Rick Santorum, won, for example, in 1996 over Bob Custra, then the lieutenant governor, for U.S. Senate nomination, and then ended up losing to Dick Durbin, the Democrat. So the Republican base sometimes can get stuff, and Bill Brady was a very conservative candidate for governor just in 2010.
Right, and he lost also in the general.
Statewide.
And as a matter of fact, Mr. Salvi and his wife were both delegate candidates for Santorum, and they were beat up in a northwest suburban district.
Oh, they didn't even make it on.
They didn't make it, no.
Yeah, well,
and it occurs to me also, this particular congressional district, or the congressional district that takes in a lot of Springfield and our surrounding area, where Tim Johnson
the new 13th
will be is here
Champaign
working
to Decatur to Springfield.
The Santorum people didn't even have any delegate candidates on the ballot.
Right, that's the one where they messed up, where they didn't get it
because
filed on
they
time.
might have had a chance to get some delegates here.
Yeah. Well, on we go. I guess before we move on to some other election results, I would say that the whole motif of money in politics is part of this too, because anyone who watches TV, and you know, people really ought to be advertising on newspaper too, but what can I tell you, would notice that Romney people spent, I believe it was about 7-1 what the Santorum people spent, and then Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich basically had no presence that I noticed advertising in Illinois. So, you know, Romney did what he has done before the Etch-a-Sketch thing happened, but that's another story, which came the day after Illinois, where his advisor talked about just shaking things up and changing things for the general, which gave his opponents more life, they think, but he really did pick up almost all the delegates, I guess, other than 10 in Illinois, and he was able to do that the way he has done in other states, that are at least middle-of-the-road states, by out-advertising his opponents to the point of pummeling them into the ground.
Well, he picked up 41 of 54. Santorum has 10, and there were 3 that were still in play because there were provisional ballots and absentee ballots, that there's a time window after the actual election day that absentee ballots postmarked election day can still be counted.
Right.
I think it's for another
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
They get 2 weeks for anything
And
postmarked
so
like the day
if
before.
it's just a matter of a dozen votes or a couple dozen to determine whether it's, who's going to be the last person in for the delegate from this district, they won't know until they get all those counted.
Yes, absolutely. I know that there was a telephone news conference with Steve Israel, who's a Democratic congressman from New York, who runs the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee that seeks to elect U.S. House Democrats. They need 25 seats to take back the U.S. House. They're hoping to get at least 2 and maybe 5 in Illinois with Illinois' new map. So they're really highlighting some races in Illinois. They didn't highlight the new 13th yet, because that one is still in play. They don't know who their candidate is yet, so they're waiting. Tim Johnson is a longtime Republican congressman from Urbana, and David Gill was the apparent winner by just 143 votes out of more than 30,000 cast over Matt Gettin. Gill is a doctor from Bloomington who is for things like national health care and abortion rights, gay marriage, very Democratic agenda, whereas Matt Gettin is an Afghanistan war veteran and a state's attorney of a small county, Greene County, and he was backed by Senator Durbin, but apparently didn't make it. But they also, Gettin says, wait till we see all these other absentee ballots that come in. So Democrats have high hopes that the new map will make Illinois turn around, plus the president will be on the ballot again. Of course, we'll see how popular he is in November. So there are other legislative battles, Charlie?
Well, there were a number of situations in which, again, because the Democrats drew the legislative maps as well, Republicans found themselves in territory that wasn't really to their liking. And there were several cases in which members of the House chose to run against a sitting senator because they looked at the House district. Sometimes they were put in the same district, or they looked at the district and they said, hey, there's no hope for me here. Mm-hmm. And I think in a couple of cases, the House members got their lunch handed to them. Senator Dillard won handily. Senator, Pankow won handily up in the Chicago suburbs. But on the eastern...
Over Randy Ramey, right?
Yeah,
mm-hmm. Who is
son-in-law, or stepson rather,
of Pate Phillip.
Former
Senate President Pate Phillip.
Pate Phillip.
Things do change over time, don't they?
They do.
As they stay the same, as long, it's all in the family, but go ahead.
And then Senator Coulter over in eastern Illinois was beaten by Representative Barrickman, who's...
Jason from the Champaign area?
Yeah. And I believe that was the only case in which a House member successfully knocked out a sitting senator. And my quick read of the incumbents who got knocked out, virtually all of them were people who were appointed, as opposed to people who won in the last election and now were seeking to be reelected. They were people who appointed to the seat because someone else was there and left. And so they really hadn't been tested in a campaign before. And I think that works against you when you're out there for the first time, particularly if you're taking on somebody of your own party who's already got a base in place, who's already got relationships with people on the grassroots level. It's hard to overcome that.
Drew, you've been over at the Statehouse a lot, mm-hmm. and I know there's been kind of a Derek Smith watch. What's happening with that? Let's go into that odd case a bit.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about Derek Smith. He is a representative in the 10th House District.
Up in Chicago?
Up in Chicago,
mm-hmm.
The west side of Chicago. He was arrested recently and charged with taking a $7,000 bribe to steer a state contract to a fictional daycare that
this was a sting operation.
Yes, it did, that the FBI and Patrick Fitzgerald, who loves to go after politicians, set up. And he was running against this kind of questionable Democratic candidate, Tom Swiss. He headed the Republicans in Cook County.
Yeah, well, the young Republicans.
The young Republicans,
mm-hmm.
and then he was running under a Democratic ticket against Smith, and it was kind of a throwaway race until this happened. but not wanting to see, I think the quote from Congressman Danny Davis was, "We don't want a wolf in sheep's clothing." Not wanting to see that happen, the Democratic Party really got behind Smith and got him reelected.
Yes, he may be indicted, but we've got to elect him so that he can.
But there's a difference. He was not elected. He was nominated.
He was
nominated.
well.
Nominated.
Yeah, he was appointed as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then he won the nomination to be in the November election. And if he is in the November election, I'm going to be the starting pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals.
Obviously Democrats now want him to resign.
Yeah, and you know, the day after he wins the election, Secretary of State Jesse White, who is his political patron, asked for his resignation. He hasn't been there yet.
Well, as we tape this show,
yes,
this could happen any moment.
Yes, he has not been to Springfield yet. No one has called him. He has offered his resignation as of 4 o'clock on Thursday. The thought is that he eventually will either step down or be pushed out, and then the Democrats will be able to put their own candidate
on the ballot.
Actually, for November.
Right, and actually he was already a sitting state rep, so they would be able to replace him. The party leaders would be able to replace him, and then could also name probably the same person to replace him on the ballot.
An interesting question one of my colleagues raised is, does Annazette Collins, who held that seat, lost her Senate campaign, does she get put back in that House seat?
Well, she has some baggage of her own, though.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, from the wider perspective, this case of just someone who's just been indicted, getting nominated in a party primary by like 70% of the vote, this is not very good for Illinois' reputation, is it?
Probably not, but on the other hand, if the situation were reversed and it was the Republican Party, they would do the same thing. And the reason is that it's really, winning the nomination is not the same as being elected. And so, as of we speak, as Drew said, Smith has not resigned the nomination, he's not resigned his seat. On the other hand, as I said, he will not be there in November.
Unless you are going to be the starting pitcher for whoever you say.
Right. God help the Cardinals. But it's politics. The question is, as a political leader, are you going to take some flack because you go through the motions and nominate a guy that you're then going to kick off the ticket, before the ink is dry on the final results? Or are you going to give the seat up and give it to a Republican who's masquerading as a Democrat, who wants to take advantage of the fact, as he himself had said, that these are low information voters? I think the way he referred to these. That does happen.
Hey, we did elect Blagojevich, statewide, so he's probably right there.
Well, but I looked at it as being a slam on the district, which is basically an African-American district of below poverty level. A lot of really poor folks live in there, and I thought this guy is being kind of a sleazeball, trying to sneak in under the radar. And so I think the Democrats did what the Republicans would have done in a similar situation. And saying, okay, we go through this exercise of the primary, but it really doesn't count because he is not going to be the guy who's going to be serving in the legislature when the next General Assembly convenes.
And the Democrats will maintain that seat.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I did mention...
and I might add, too, that, and we were talking about this before the show, there was a time when there was a candidate who was in a Democratic primary in Chicago, had the misfortune of passing away a week to 10 days before the actual election. He was nominated.
Same kind of reason.
Yeah.
On the ballot, and you don't want to give it to the other party.
Well, I don't think there were any Republicans, but it was just people voted for him sort of like as a tribute, with the understanding that he's probably not going to serve.
Yeah. Which doesn't even get into cases like when the late elder John Stroger, who was Cook County Board Chairman just before he had a re-election, had a bad stroke. Nobody was given information to the press about how bad off he actually was, and he was re-elected anyway in the middle of a tight race a couple years back, and people are still upset about that.
And here Sangamon County has had a habit of electing people to the legislature or to the state's attorney's office who then go do something else, and they appoint somebody who then stands for election, gets elected, then goes to do something else. So it's
the Sangamon County Republican Party, which has been mostly the strong, long-time organization doing that, is in somewhat of a turmoil now, which is another story. It's more localized to Springfield, but clearly myself at the State Journal Register, we've been following this closely because Tony Libri, who's been party chairman since 2005, has pretty much all of the high-level elected officials saying we need a new leader, and there was a fight even for precinct committeeman posts, which took on a bigger deal than some of the larger offices in this area. So parties don't meet until April 18th in their county conventions, where the new precinct committeeman will vote on a chairman. So that's going to be a pretty interesting day in Springfield. On another front, and I don't know if a professor from U of I can talk about it, but Michael Hogan has, I guess, less than 2 years been the U of I president and just stepped down. Who wants to weigh in on this one?
Well, he stepped down after several letters from the faculty at U of I saying we don't want this guy around anymore.
That's a problem.
Yeah. There was, the faculty at U of I had already been through kind of a disgraced presidency. This guy was brought in to clean that up, and then it comes out a few months ago that these kind of snippy letters are coming out of his office saying, basically shut up, get on board with the president.
Right, because the president was going something about a new enrollment plan procedure that would involve all 3 campuses instead of 1. And faculty didn't like it.
Right, and the campuses are very territorial, and they want their money, understandably, and so that kind of idea was that the U of I Champaign, the flagship campus, might kind of get preference in that. Mm-hmm. And so you had these letters go out, or these emails. It turns out it may or may not have been his secretary. She stepped down and now she's in a teaching position, and that's actually what he'll end up doing.
Yeah, and she was actually, I think, some kind of top assistant, because she was making like a couple $100,000 a year. But
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe secretary isn't quite the right word, but so he will do the same thing. As of July 1st, he will resign from the presidency and be, I believe, a history professor there.
Yeah, which is the way they were. And he makes a pretty good salary. I wonder. I didn't read to find out if it's going to stay, because I know he was making about $600,000 a year, which people wondered about in this time. But he came from another university, and I guess that's what happens when you lead one of the largest universities in the country.
Yeah, and part of the difficulty is, and you guys can relate to this because you guys are reporters, as I once was, the relationship between...
Oh, you still are, Charlie.
At heart.
Yeah.
The relationship between the faculty and like the administrators, particularly the ones who are farther away, is kind of like between the reporter and the editor. And there's kind of this hostility that you know what you're doing and you don't want them butting in to tell you how to cover your beat. And faculty is very jealous of their prerogatives, and they don't want some administrator and this agitation against Hogan came from the Champaign campus, not from Springfield. Mm-hmm. But the sense even in Springfield or in Chicago would be the same. You don't want administrators telling you, coming in and telling you, here's what you're supposed to do, here's how you're supposed to do it. You don't want things centralized to the extent that Hogan wanted to do it. And so he, as Drew said, the faculty in Champaign, including some really big names in academic circles, wrote this letter saying, kick the guy out. Well, the Board of Trustees at their last meeting said, well, Mike, we'll give you a chance, go over there and see if you can get fences mended. Well, apparently the fences are still down, and that they decided to yank him. Yeah. And so they accepted his resignation, which he tendered today, as they said.
Just going back to the election situation a little bit, since 2000 in Florida, we thought ballot problems were over, no more hanging chads, everybody has new systems. But this time, at least 25 counties were delivered sealed bunches of printed ballots that turned out to be about, I guess, 1/8 of an inch too big to fit into the reader machines. So you had election judges in all of these counties, either early in the day or after the polls closed or during the day, shaving the edges off these ballots so they could fit in the machines. And Macoupin County, for example, where Carlinville is, took till 4 in the morning to finish counting. Is it this just silliness, or I know it had to do with a subcontractor to 2 voting tabulation system companies, and the printer just got the dimensions a little bit wrong. So any lasting damage, or we just hope it won't happen again?
I think it's a case of just hoping it won't happen again. I think the footnote on this is, I believe states got money to make sure this kind of thing, from the federal government, to make sure this kind of thing didn't happen. And lo and behold, come Tuesday, it did happen. It wasn't quite as widespread as it was first reported. I think there was concerns that, oh my gosh, is this going to be every county? Is this going to be a huge problem? It was a slight problem, but this was no hanging chad, that's for sure.
Yeah. One disappointment, obviously there was a terrible occurrence several weeks ago when a tornado hit Harrisburg and there was bad weather systems and 7 people died in that Illinois town, and I think it's something like 400 homes over some communities were damaged. Well, the federal government at first, and then after an appeal from our U.S. senators and our governor, denied the kind of emergency assistance that has come to some other communities, including Springfield back in 2007. So the Illinois officials are now saying, let's try to get small business association or administration loans, whatever we can get from the feds. But is this any kind of breakdown, or is this just bad luck? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the ins and outs of what the FEMA criteria are, but I do know that the nation has experienced an extraordinary number of these not rare, but of these catastrophic weather events in recent years, and the pot is only so large, and the mood in Washington seems to be cut, and so I think that factored into it, that we're running out of money. We've had to spend so much on these other hurricanes and tornadoes and disasters. And we're looking at what happened in Harrisburg maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, it would have been good enough, but we're thinking now, well, they can probably make it on their own.
I shouldn't be doing this, but sometimes I read the comments of people who write in anonymously or with screen names under stories that get like on our website. And some people are saying, well, hey, this is the president's state. Why is his administration forgetting us? Is that a fair thing to say?
It's not just commenters.
It's Gary Forby.
State Senator Gary Forby brought up that point. He's from around there. I think people might overestimate how much, obviously Barack Obama is the president, so he has a lot of pull, but how much ins and outs he's involved with FEMA in the day-to-day thing. Plus, he's facing a re-election. If you have someone say something like that and then you kind of kowtow to a state senator, that's certainly not going to look good in the fall.
Well, everything anybody running for president does gets extreme scrutiny these days.
And as I said at the outset, I don't really know what the FEMA criteria are, but if you accept the proposition that there are criteria in place, and standards, and Harrisburg was measured against these standards and didn't meet it, then I think it's probably better in terms of a good government sense that FEMA acted the way it did, rather than saying, oh gosh, Durbin wants this, and this is the president's home state. Well, here's what the standards are. Well, we'll just bend them a little bit and send them
obviously
money.
Some people might take advantage of that in a political sense.
Yeah, and again, I think you have to follow what the standards are, and that's assuming that there are demonstrable, measurable criteria out there to measure this damage.
Which one would hope. Speaking of taking advantage, legislative scholarships is something that some members of the legislature seem to have taken advantage of over the years, when they are able to give out a certain number of tuition waivers to constituents. Sometimes, however, they've gone to kids of donors, sometimes they've gone to relatives. And the House took action again to say, let's abolish this program because everybody's screaming about it. What are the odds, Drew, that this really goes away when it hits the Senate? Any idea?
Very small.
Really?
And I could be wrong here, but Senate Republicans are totally on board for this. They claim that their caucus has stopped this practice.
They don't even give out the scholarships
They don't even
anymore.
give out the scholarships anymore. But the Senate Democrats, who have the majority, obviously, they like the program. They say it helps them give scholarships to kids who maybe couldn't afford to go to the U of I without taking on massive amounts of debt, or it helps kind of the disenfranchised in their districts. So if nothing else, it's going to be an extremely close vote.
Charlie, you've seen this debate come and go for years. Yeah, and the result has always been the same, that the scholarships continue. And the thing that I wonder is, will there even be a vote?
You think they'll just
in the
hold it?
Senate?
Well, there's that possibility. all the bills that the House passes goes to the Senate, and the Senate puts them in a committee to decide what to do with them before they actually send them out to be heard in substantive committees. Same thing, everything the Senate passes goes to the House Rules Committee that decides whether or not we're going to hear it. And I could see it just getting stuck in that committee, and that'll be the end of it. Because this is the kind of issue that if you do bring it up for a vote, the Democratic majority is going to be in a bind because there are members in the caucus, particularly minority members, who want to continue this program because
some of their constituents, this is the only opportunity they'll have, or they'll say that.
That they have, yeah. But that's the kind of a vote that if they vote to continue the program, then they're going to get hammered by the editorial writers and by the columnists and everything. So if I'm John Cullerton, the Senate president, I'd like to figure out a way that I can spare my members getting hammered, but I can still accede to their belief that this is important for their constituents. And the easiest way to do that is just kind of stick it in committee and forget about it.
Interesting. Well, I don't know if it's fair to bring this kind of thing up because, as I have discussed among colleagues for a number of years, you know, when Rod Blagojevich was governor, and I remember interviewing him when he was kind of new, and I looked closely, and I could swear it looked like hair dye. And I almost asked him that question, but I didn't ask him that question because I wouldn't ask a female governor that question, and I didn't think it was fair to ask. Of course, when he got indicted and arrested, people started making fun of his hair nationally, so perhaps the hair fence has been crossed. But we now find out, and is it fair or not that his barber has told somebody in the news, it was in all the papers, that apparently he's really gray, and so within a couple of months, Rod Blagojevich will be gray. Is that a fair thing, now that he's in prison, this poor man?
Well, since I'm not above kicking a man when he's down, I would say the fact that Blagojevich's hair was phony is in keeping with the whole public persona.
I say, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I say let this be the last we hear of Rod Blagojevich until he comes up for release.
I can almost guarantee that's not going to happen because things will come out as we move on.
But the thing that really got me, if you watched his swan song, and there was a picture that was taken that to me captured Rod Blagojevich. Here his little girl is. Her daddy's going to go away for 12 years. She'll be a grown woman before she sees this guy again. Well, not before she sees it, but before he's free again. And she's tugging, come daddy, come back in the house. Spend your final moments with us. And he's there signing autographs, glad-handed, you know, being the circus clown. To me, that captured what Rod Blagojevich is all about.
Well, I think we're going to have to end on that unfortunate note. Drew Thomason, Charlie Wheeler, thanks for your help. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bernard Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.